Thank you for joining Marianne and the Professor. Today, I am really delighted to be joined by Diane Chaplin, who is someone that I met in England earlier this month at a conference, and we became fast friends. Diana, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today.
My pleasure, Marianne. Thank you.
So Diana has a very interesting story. We were sitting over dinner with another gal and found out, we discovered that your husband is deceased. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, this story tumbled out of how you are the survivor of a relationship where your husband was a cocaine addict and ended up taking his life, or his life ended because of the addiction. And right. We can go into that more, but your story was so poignant and you were so transparent about it. And then you pulled out the transcript for a book that you have written that you will be publishing. And mm-hmm. I was just struck with the rawness of your story, but the importance of your story. So I wanted to kind of explore the whole topic with you and discuss it because it is one of those taboo subjects.
Oh, massively taboo.
Yeah,
massively.
No one's talking about it. I'm sure many are in the same place as you, but yes. They keep it concealed. So I'll start right off the bat by saying, I said, that's so interesting. I had just watched the John Mulaney special called Baby J on Netflix, and he exposed his whole story, his rehab story, the intervention, but he presented it all with a humorous twist. Did you see that? And I was shocked when I saw this because I thought, oh, no one talks about this. What was your reaction when you saw that?
Well, I'm a huge John Mulaney fan, which is really mm-hmm. ironic because not everybody knows who that is. And,
mm-hmm.
and so I was waiting for the last 3 years, where's John, Mm-hmm. Well, I saw this recently, a month or more ago, and it was just riveting. I was so excited and I was so moved and I was so he had the courage to stand up there and say, yep, here I am, because there were rumors, of course, and so on, that he'd gone into rehab and what have you and getting divorced and whatnot. But he brilliantly used that to share it. And yes, for the purpose of entertainment, mm-hmm. but it was far greater and deeper and more profound than just that. And it was just so brilliant that he shared that. And I was so excited. And I'll figure out how to get in touch with him because I have something to offer. Actually.
Well, you mentioned as well that Robert Downey Jr. also has the same story. And at some point he was unemployable. And he shared his story in multiple interviews, mm-hmm. but yet another individual, kind of star, who has shared his story. But this is a subject that is not discussed, right? And why is that? Because it's not an uncommon story, but why is no one talking about it?
Well, it's a stigma. There's just a horrible social stigma around addiction, and we all have the image because it's just been pressed upon us through books, media, film, that the addict is really this bum mm-hmm. on the street, and there they are, we don't classify them as human almost, people who are homeless. And so there's so many assumptions with just a homeless person all on its own. So when we, of course, use the word addict, everybody is just like, oh, and the conversation changes and people are uncomfortable. And if you're associated with that word in any way, there's a quick judgment and a quick sort of push off. And it's a way to shut down a conversation or a party or a social network.
Well, we do associate addicts with street people, but in actuality, I think a good portion of addicts are white collar, very well-to-do, very affluent, very successful. They may be
Oh,
doctors, they may be lawyers, they're high
yeah,
power businessmen, but they're closet addicts.
yeah.
Tell me the story of your husband, because your husband was high functioning in a sense.
Oh, yeah, brilliant
Um,
man.
yeah,
Yeah,
so tell me
yeah.
your story.
Yeah, it's not exclusive, to someone who's homeless or anything like that.
Hmm.
Absolutely not. And so, um, we so my husband was a brilliant guy and very successful in business. Um, he was also an artist, and I know artists get picked on. Oh, well, yeah, a lot of artists are addicts, but again, you get sucked into that dogma. But he was super brilliant on both sides, which is very unusual, actually.
Hmm.
And so this was a long withstanding um, battle that he had, and it had been established long before I came on the scene. And I recognized it, but it seemed kind of mild to me at first. And I thought, well, he's been a bachelor for so long, and he's such a brilliant man and loving person that this sort of silliness will you know taper off, because now we're launching into a new life together and so on. And so I had a leap of faith, and so there we were. And so for you know for the most of 10 years, I was in this ecosystem of loving an addict. And how I I didn't just wake up and acknowledge it, but how I somehow got into a routine of managing this. And so I became the shepherd, so I would always be aware of events and who we were socializing with and what that might mean, and how there may be triggers and so on and so forth. So I was always troubleshooting and just trying to guide and so on, these personal, private, social times, in a smooth and orderly fashion. Now it didn't always go that way. Um, so it became just part of my relationship with my husband. It was just my role. And over time, of course, it was exhausting. It was, and it's very isolating. It's very lonely. And because for my mental health, um, I'd have to be very careful with what I shared to people. And so I wouldn't really be able to share my stuff on this level, because fear of judgment, and of course there's humility and shame and so on. And it's all horribly, the same kind of, it's just, you know, it's just, you have to navigate away from certain conversations. And you can only piecemeal certain things, as far as how you're feeling. So I was never able to really share what it was I was experiencing, and because people couldn't relate to it. People can't relate to it. And you want to create optimism, like, or you want to maintain optimism. You want to keep moving forward and believing that, okay, this is going to resolve, because we're doing all this work, and he's done so well this time through this cycle. And no, we haven't. Now we're back again. So it was just, there was an all undercurrent of optimism on my behalf.
Hmm.
And then I'm still strategizing, okay, what else can I do, what else can we do, to get healthy. So it's just a chronic, endless existence. It
Hmm.
just,
Hmm.
and I was forever thinking that this will taper, and he will be healthy again, because he's so brilliant. Like, he's such a smart person, and he's so successful, and surely he's gonna succeed. you know
So
um
how did he manage to conduct himself in the business world and cover up this addiction? Or
Well, everybody has their own way of functioning,
Mhm,
and it wasn't a daily, addiction. You didn't have appetite for daily, and it involved alcohol firstly. There's always alcohol and then other
mhm,
things to follow, right? So it wasn't always cocaine per se.
mhm,
But he was very high functioning, and he was by and large a very healthy person. He was athletic and so on. So he could manage and do his exercise and do his business and perform and be the great business guy. And then he would, over time, it could be over a variety of weeks and so on, he'd allow the alcohol and then so on and so on to sort of leach back in. And what it is, addiction is very it's not cut and dry. So it's a physiological and it's a psychological, you know, issue, right? And you and I cannot relate to that because we think, well, just stop. Like it's so simple.
mhm,
Just stop doing that, okay?
mhm.
And it has nothing to do with that whatsoever. It's a prison, really. Once you're afflicted with an addiction, you're every day you will always have to mentally and physically deal with that addiction and create your day to be free and clear of that. I mean, I know that to be true, 100%.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so it's like the evil twin, it sneaks up on you. And I would see this, I would witness it. And so the addict that would, you know, would rise from my husband. I mean, I could see it sort of manifesting. And so I was able to know when this cycle was going to start all over again.
And were there triggers that reflecting back, what would trigger an episode?
Well, what would help along, it to set off would be either a social event, where there was drinking involved, with friends and so on, or perhaps an event, a social event, a Christmas party or something, perhaps. Maybe something that was uncomfortable, that a birthday even, where I wouldn't have known that would have been stressful, but that triggered, an event, if you will.
Mhm.
So it was all very, very personal and very private to him, which it is, and even he would not fully understand it. And he recognized that it was bigger than he. And he did on occasion thank me for saving his life. So,
Mm.
so how many times? So, my role became, um, I was very trained up in how to manage this. And, it didn't always work in my favor, of course, but, I saved a lot of moments, but then there were a lot of moments that were lost too.
And would he ever turn on you or blame you, or was he very grateful for you, being, like we talked about, the supporting cast?
Yeah,
You're like, he's the main,
he's a star. Yeah,
the star of the performance. You're the
yeah,
supporting cast member, but
correct.
you're either you're enabling, or you are masking, or you are dancing around to make
Yeah,
him look better and conceal the reality of what's going on, which is
100%.
exhausting. Did
It's
he
exhausting.
recognize your role and thank you, or did he resent you, or what was that like?
Well, it was mixed. It was mixed. Like, for instance, it's a double life. Okay.
Mhm.
It's a secret life. So it's a secret life for the addict, and it's a secret life for the supporting cast member.
Yeah.
And so you've got a dual situation, and you're managing, depending on who you're with, the reality.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's exhausting. And was he resentful? Um, Very rarely. Occasionally, only on a few occasions did he sort of, express a sort of a sour tone. But generally not. And in
Mhm.
fact, with an intervention that I staged, um, I thought, oh boy, he's going to give me the stink eye for God knows how long. But in fact, he thanked me for that.
So you
So,
did stay, so you did, like
oh, yeah.
like John Mulaney talked about an intervention with all of his friends.
Oh, I staged
They
it.
did, they staged a
Oh,
big
yeah.
intervention and got him into rehab. So
Hmm.
you staged an intervention, at
I
least
did.
one.
I
How did
did.
that go? What was that like?
Well, I set it up with his closest um, friends and business partner, and the men in his family. and
Mm.
uh, so I was not there. I set it up to happen, and it also, at that time, it was new information to all of these people.
Oh,
You
so none of them had suspected anything prior to this.
Well, I'm not saying that not any of them had suspected,
Hmm.
but it wasn't, I hadn't shared, hadn't gone to this level. And I think the family were the most surprised.
Mm.
And so there came a time, a threshold where I knew I had to bring them in. I couldn't manage this on my own anymore. And so I did.
And
And
how did it go?
well, actually, they for the most part they stepped up. Not all the family, I mean, again, it's unique to each individual, and how they process that, and deal with it, and their own frustration or anger with that, or I mean, goodness, that's unpacking a lot of different
Hmm.
people's stuff. And
Hmm.
but for the most part, there was pretty good support there. But again, without the full understanding of what the addict is actually physiologically and psychologically going through, there wasn't a lot of patience. It's
Mm.
like, okay, we've got this out in the open now, so that's got to improve things, which it did in a way, because he felt relieved, as he told me, but it didn't fix anything. It wasn't the silver bullet. It was part of the process, and very, very good. But then you later had, a family member who I believe just became very impatient with it, and just said, you get one shot, of my time and support. And so it everybody has a threshold,
Hmm.
and everyone has a way of dealing with that. And one method is to kind of scold, or, there's shame involved, right? And uh, I don't think that works. you know,
So there was this intervention, but the
mm,
follow-up was not into rehab he went. It was more like a disclosure to business associates and
yes,
family. We have this problem, but
right.
perhaps what could have followed would have been a full-blown off to rehab you go.
Well, and that happened not in that moment. Um, that happened because another event occurred. And so the only remedy that I put forward, and it was really brave and bold on my part, because it's always risky. You don't know if I'm going to just push him over the edge, and I didn't want to dismantle the marriage. I wanted
Mhm.
to grow it. So it's a fine line, but I did lay down an ultimatum, because there was a predicament where I and our child were over here for, my birthday. We'd traveled, hundreds of miles. We were going to rendezvous, and he missed the flight. And so he said, well, I'll come right away. It was the next day. And I said, actually, our communication cut out because we were in the wilderness. Basically, we were, we got cut off, and I had a moment to think about it. And I didn't want to say, don't come, but I thought, no, no, say, do not come. You must go to this rehab. And we'd already looked at this rehab and talked about it. So it was sort of it had already been set up
Mhm.
in a way. And so my ultimatum was, no, actually, why don't you go there?
Mhm.
And so he did. which was really huge, really huge. And I didn't get a chance to speak to him while he was there, and he was only there for 10 days. And it was quite a profound experience for him, as he shared with me. But the counselor, one of the counselors, reached out, because they do, and he just flagged me to say, this isn't over. And the tricky thing about your husband is that he's very smart, and it's the smart ones that are more challenging, because they can, they can just think their way, intellectualize their way through it and out of it, and be better. So
Mm-hmm.
he just gave me a warning that, this isn't over, and just be mindful. So he was right. He was right. Now, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So 10 days in is typically rehab months. I often think of rehab as being 6 months, say, to really
Yeah,
repattern the brain and repattern the behaviors,
yeah. If
etc.
yeah.
What happened at the 10-day mark that he decided, okay, I'm better, I'm going home? What was that process like? Or
Well,
was it the rehab center that suggested he go home, or how did he leave after 10 days?
well, he wanted to get back to work, and it's thousands of dollars a day.
So
These rehab centers are not for the faint of heart or the faint of wallet. They're very, very, very expensive. So um, he made the executive decision um, to leave, which of course he had that option to do so. And as much as I wanted him in there indefinitely, whatever, a few months or what have you, um, there were these other variables, which is very, another piece of reality, you know?
because when you're in rehab, I guess there's no ability to work while you're in rehab. You
Yeah.
are focusing on your own
Yeah.
issues, and yeah.
Yeah.
Well, heartbreaking that he actually got in and
Yeah.
then departed, because you can
Yeah.
see that he was on the path to recovery, possibly.
Oh, he
Then
wanted
he,
to.
yeah,
Oh no, he wanted to. Like there wasn't anything about the situation that he didn't want to be on the other side of it. Definitely not.
heartbreaking. So after that intervention, then what happened?
Well, then things were lovely, and we had some housekeeping rules, and we weren't and I went along, hey, we won't have a drink, that's fine. Um uh all that was easy for me to, I could um support that. And I knew things were corroding when he sat me down and asked, because he thought it would be okay, whilst I was in the same space with him, that he would be allowed one glass of wine, say with dinner. And I thought, uh-oh, okay, so that makes me the police. Like I
Mhm,
was the police before, I suppose. I like to call it a shepherd, but now I'm the police. So, you're bad cop, good cop,
mhm.
you know. So of course, with that arrangement, that was just, of course, a setup to fail. So then, and again, I can't stress enough that it's physiological. Like I could see the chemical change go on with him, and how his body and his behavior was, his body was craving, like it was just, everything about him was transforming, um, every time he, ended up having an episode, if you will. So you can see it, you can feel it, and then it would happen, and then there'd be the backlash of grave remorse,
Mhm.
and of course your body feels like it's been, run over by how many trucks, and and then so then you're flattened. He'd be flattened out and really receptive to, ideas and and support, and yeah, and very open. And then of course, you know it just, time would go along and it would just restart again. So it would have its cycles. And
And and in the midst of all this, you're trying to raise a daughter.
correct, yeah.
And in a sense, you have two dependents in a sense. You have
Yeah.
your daughter and your husband. Your husband is more complicated dependent. So
Yeah.
how did you maneuver with a daughter?
Well, she was quite young, quite small, so she wasn't of the age to recognize anything or see anything.
Mm,
She was becoming more aware,
mhm,
um, but she hadn't yet. She was 7.
mm.
When he passed. So she doesn't have a lot of memory. So there wasn't, she didn't have an experience, if you will, with that. But I was managing. Um, I was the full-time parent, which I was happy with. It was an honor.
Mhm.
But as you say, I was parenting in multiple other ways to, my husband as well,
Yeah.
as we were discussing. But
So here you are yo-yoing up and down. And at what, I mean, you don't need to talk about this if you don't want to, because it's kind of sensitive, but what was kind of the final chapter?
for him, you
Hmm.
mean? Well,
Hmm.
he died of an overdose. So the worst case scenario happened, right? So as a supporting cast member, which I like to, that's sort of an easy description of who
Yeah.
we are, family, friend, sibling, whatever we are. We're just watching this movie by and large. And that is by far, of course, the worst case scenario. So you worry about that happening because it's possible. Um, but of course, I chose that, I wasn't going to believe that, or that's not the direction it was going to take. So it it did take that direction, and it wasn't deliberate. It was a massive error, and it happened. And it happened. He was away in a conference, and he I don't, whatever he ended up ingesting and so on, put him into a EMS cardiac arrest situation, and then um, in the hospital, in the emerge, in is it ICU, and it took, I got the call, and it took 2.5 days to determine that he, once his system got settled down and his organs, that he was fully brain dead. So we had to unplug him. Yeah. So it was a horrible finale. Horrible. And so, with that, there was, so much from that moment, so much more to learn and to process, and then to deal with. I mean, that's a whole nother piece, that I lived through, and got through. And I think I was very successful to come out, the other end. Um, and I have, I have all that experience. Um,
Oh, but the trauma of losing your husband in this way, what was the reaction of associates, business associates, family members, friends? Because I
oh,
would imagine there, as you mentioned before, there's the shame, there is the humility, the fear to share this story in a transparent way with those
yeah.
around you. Did you share it openly, or did you selectively share
Well,
this
with
story?
family, with
Mm-hmm.
close family, not all family. No, no.
Not
But
all.
No, not all family. And with certain, specific friends. So it was selective, and then to the rest of the world, it was a cardiac arrest. You know. So again, it was living a secret life,
Yeah.
and then post that life, living another secret life,
Yes.
right? And keeping that going, right?
Keeping his legacy in top form. You're
Yeah,
protecting even his legacy.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
then how do you grieve when you still are
Yeah,
playing the role of not an enabler, but you're protecting him and protecting the
absolutely.
memory of him?
Well, and what really triggered something, which is an interesting piece of the story, is that the coroner, they do their thing and they write a report. And so this report was quite a chunky paragraph, and um, it was a storyboard of, really, they didn't know the individual. They never spoke to me about my husband, and they made these assumptions that were incorrect. And so basically that he was just another one off the street, you know. And
Oh,
it wasn't just cause of death, X. It went into, this individual's lifestyle. And so I reached out. It took me a while because it was a labyrinth to get to the top, the chief coroner. And I reached out through letters and so on and so forth for months to say, this won't do. This report, no, like, that's not correct. For starters, it's not even accurate. And to maim this man, who, that was not his story. And, he may not go down with that label on this record. I'm sorry. That's completely unacceptable. And at the end of the day, I finally got a phone call from the chief coroner, and she apologized. It was really an incredible moment. But she herself reviewed the file and said, we see this all the time, and we make judgments, and it's really a conveyor belt, and we lose the sight of, you know, that was an individual, that was a
mhm.
human being. And we lose that. We become calloused. It was a really profound statement on her part. And I was so, I don't even know the words, but it was a real moment. And so they rewrote it. Basically, they took
Yeah,
all that storyboard out, and they just said died of XYZ, period. But that was
yeah.
a big moment, because for me, that wasn't acceptable.
No.
It wasn't.
What would have motivated the coroners to create that narrative? Because there must be a lot of deaths like your husband of successful
Yeah.
white collar addicts who were very high functioning at one level, but addicts.
Well, he wouldn't have known that he was white collar. They wouldn't have known he was anybody, really. He had an enlarged heart. And that is an association and an assumption that that person has undergone chronic cocaine use. So I asked, well, tell me about chronic, the word chronic, because when
Mm-hmm,
I say and think of chronic, it means to me every day.
mm-hmm.
It's like ongoing. And the first coroner, the junior coroner, said, no, just not necessarily every day. No. And I said, okay, well, wait a minute. So the language here, let's talk about the language. And so they associate an enlarged heart with chronic cocaine use. Now, my husband's father had just had a quadruple bypass.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a very fit, beautiful guy, very healthy man, my father-in-law. And he too had an enlarged heart. And it was thought to be hereditary.
Mm.
So I said, well, guess what? You can't stick that chronic cocaine use onto an enlarged heart exclusively.
Mhm.
you know, that's not accurate. That's not
Mhm.
true. And furthermore, my husband's father, you know,
Mhm.
this was the situation, right?
Mhm.
So that was a strong argument, you know, but I
Mhm.
had to point it out. But I got there, and it was very important for me to have that properly done, you know, for his dignity
Mhm.
and moving forward, you know, that was just, so that was just one piece of the story. And I've got it
That's
written. I've recorded it. I've written it, you know, in my book, right? That
now let's talk about this book because we were very privileged to have you read the transcript of your new book that is coming out. You've got a publisher in Toronto
yes.
who looks like he'll be, working with you. Uh, so tell me about how this book took life. What inspired you to write a
Oh,
book?
too funny. Okay, so I don't know why, but a dozen years ago or something, this funny little book came across my zone, and I thought, what a incredible book. And can I show it to you? You
Yeah,
want to?
absolutely. Yes.
So it's this thing, and it's a bit naughty. Um, but it's this wonderful author, and he did very well. This was a huge release, and it's a silly little book, and it's very dear, and it rhymes, and it's got cute little, you know, pictures of, oh, little darlings, and it's for adults though who are trying to put their little darlings to sleep. And of course, we've all been there where they
Yes.
don't go to sleep, you know.
Yeah.
And so it ended up being a very amusing book between adults to laugh at how tired they are,
it's a
basically.
it's a predicament that every parent finds himself
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
and
yeah.
very clever,
Very,
very
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 clever.
clever.
So that book really inspired me, and I'm a writer. I'm a songwriter. So this type of writing resonates with me because it's like a verse and, you know, chorus and so on and so forth, and I get the rhyming thing.
Mhm.
And so um I just loved how it was framed, and I thought, wow, okay. So I've been taking notes, I'd been journaling since the get-go. So I had all this information and all this reflection. And I wanted to write something desperately for years.
Mhm.
But anytime I threw myself into, you know, the conventional book, I thought, well, how do I, you know, how do I manage all that? I mean, where do I start, begin? I don't know. And also, if you've got a big, huge book, who's going to read it from front to back? I mean, it sort of would be a piecemeal event, most
Mhm.
likely. I mean, these
Mhm.
things are not always read through. And so there was a snowstorm, and I was in my property at my property, and I couldn't drive out because the driveway was completely packed with snow for 2 days, almost 3 days, and I was fine. But it just all came together, and I happened to, you know, have all my notes and whatnot, you know, just all over the table and such. And I thought, okay, well, this is it. And I just sat down and I started to write a song. But of course, I didn't bring in any music to it, which is how typically I would write. And um, I just did the poetry piece, and it was very flowy. It just rolled out, and it ended up being a chronological story of the entire experience. And it's also written in a bit of a whimsical way,
Mhm. Well, okay,
slightly.
even the title. Share with us the title because that
Oh,
indicates.
yes. Well, grow the up,
So grow the F up.
the
So
F.
same kind of uh, idea as the
Right.
sleep book, but this is really an ode to your deceased husband saying,
Correct.
wake up. And
Wake.
so can you read us an excerpt of this? Because
Well,
when you
and
read it, I started to cry. I thought it was very profound. It
mm,
was beautifully written. And you read it to us in, under 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
like you say, this will be read from start to finish,
Yeah.
but it tells the story so beautifully. Can you read a little bit of it?
Yes,
I
and may I add that grow the F up is not to suggest at all that it's that simple. It's
No,
actually not
no.
about that whatsoever. So this is a paradox.
Mhm.
And to the, to people who, well, I'll just read it,
Yeah,
okay?
okay.
But now, do you want it from top to bottom?
What I'm wondering if you should give us a portion that
Just a
let people
piece.
I would say give us a piece, but go as long as you like. I thought it's very well written.
Okay, so just keeping in mind it's a paradox. I might do a couple of teasers, skip to a little piece in the
Mhm,
middle, and then just let it go,
mhm, mhm,
okay?
mhm.
Because it does make a transition. So, grow the F up. I've counted many a time the evenings that never end. How will it play out? A not so uncommon trend. I encourage as I can to steer you from disaster, a thankless job, I'm aware. You are your own master. Our child now lays asleep, and with any given luck, you will appear before morn. So quickly it's prudent. You need to grow the F up. You reappear the next day, your body and mind contorted, toxic waste expelling from your pores. I'm sorry, is all that you can say as you drag your self inflicted baggage to sleep off your remorse and decay. Looming from the fog, a tall glass of water in hand. Thanks for saving my life, babe. Is my reward, my purpose, my brand. This journey, this path, this cycle, you're a prisoner of Camp Runamuck. Please, my darling, I beg you, grow the F up. So this is how it flows, and chronologically it goes
Mm.
along. Then there's a chorus, what I refer to, but it's a shift. And here we are. Without further ado, nothing has changed. The neural patterns are set. This is not a mere game. I have tried everything I know, from compassion to campaign. I am empty. I am defeated. This dirty dragon I cannot tame. It's out of my hands and it's out of his too. I have no advice with what to do. My optimism wanes and my isolation increases. This is an ugly journey, the most toxic of diseases. So that's my teaser. But it's quite beautiful. It's quite profound, and at the very minimum, the minimal, it will invite conversation immediately on the subject matter. It's a learning tool. It can be an anonymous gift. I can see it, on the table of a psychologist's office, a rehab. It's there as a tool. And once you start reading it, you have to read it from beginning to
Yes.
end. It's right there.
It's
So
it's brilliant that you channeled your creative energy into something like this, because I can see that it could be a very powerful tool to share with people that you suspect there might be a problem, or are
yeah,
healing from this.
yes.
What what could people have done better to support you in all of this? Because it must be very isolating, very lonely walk to be
Oh,
the victim of this. Your spouse, your husband, and the father of your daughter is now gone,
mhm,
and you don't feel like you could be completely transparent to everyone as to why he's gone.
right.
What could people do better to support you?
What could they have done?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Well, you know, um, there at the time I didn't have any resource but my own. So I had to, I mean, you make up things as you go along. And and then you cherry pick what information you're going to share to certain people. So then you can get bits of advice or direction or encouragement from
mm-hmm.
certain people that you go to and honor and respect. There wasn't one fundamental source that I had. I did try an Al-Anon meeting, a few of them, and I found it very unhelpful for the most part. I understood that you're there and you're sharing, and that's good. But it felt to me like a stagnant pond with no fresh water coming through. There was no natural spring water underneath. There was no stream coming through. So this pond was just stagnant, septic, and stinky. Like, what do you do with all this, right?
Mhm.
Okay, we've shared, now what? So it was not satisfying at all. And I couldn't go back because it was just so depressing. It was just, and there was no action, there was no forward movement. And it's like, okay, so what I ended up doing, because the resources that were available were next to nothing. And so what I do is I have an email where people can quietly reach out to me, and we can set up, a number of conversations, if you will, whereby I can learn about their personal and customized situation. And for one, it's a huge relief because it validates anyone's story,
Mhm.
anyone's situation instantly. And that's a biggie, is to have someone else validate where you're coming from,
Yeah.
and know it to be true and real. And so with that individual story, then I assist in directing, in specific steps based on their situation, and providing action steps and so on. And firstly, of course, acknowledging what the situation is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, okay, we got to start at the beginning here, and how you got here,
Yeah.
and owning it. So I'm able to hold your hand and walk you through it. And it's just very satisfying. I mean, it's so beautiful.
Well,
It's
you are in a very unique position because you can truly empathize. You've been there.
Mhm.
You are speaking from your own personal journey, and you can validate, like you say, and walk alongside someone who is in a very similar predicament. So I
Yeah.
think it's a very powerful position. In a sense, you're almost like a coach. And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think and maybe in the future, I envision that you could have an organization where you train up people, and it would probably need to be people who have walked through it as well. I don't think,
100%. Yeah.
unless you've lived that, how are you going to truly be able to walk
Uh,
with someone else and
Agreed.
understand?
No,
So
agreed.
it
100%.
sounds to me like there is a void that needs to be filled, and
Yeah.
your book may become a great launching pad for that project.
Yeah. I
Uh,
believe so.
I
I'd
think
like
there's
to think
so,
it.
and it,
Yeah.
I think you have an incredible future
Mhm.
in terms of reaching those people who were the victims in the supporting cast, because I
Yeah.
think the victims have their support well established, but you as a
Yes.
supporting cast member had virtually nothing.
That's
And
good.
so it sounds to me
Yeah.
like you could create something quite remarkable.
Mhm. And by the time that
Mhm.
someone reaches out to me, they generally already have their seatbelt on, but they may not have the shoulder strap, or they may need a helmet
Yeah.
or
Yes.
goggles too.
Yeah.
So it just depends. And there's ways to move forward with this, um, uh, and empower yourself, and be in a better position, um, emotionally, and physically, and logistically.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get any more real.
No, no, this is such
Yeah.
an important topic. And I think
Yeah.
right now we're seeing epidemic levels of suicides, drug overdoses in
Yeah.
Canada. This is
Mm.
a massive problem,
Yes, it is.
and it's not being dealt with, I don't think,
No.
appropriately. And there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of damage, collateral damage.
Yeah.
And I think you can speak to this and be a real leader in Canada in terms of providing some solutions.
Yes.
So Diana Chaplin, I'm suspecting when this book, I hope it comes out soon, because it's going to give you a wonderful platform
Thank
to
you. Yes.
orchestrate some solutions and care for people who are in your predicament.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. So I look forward to seeing the book, Wake the F Up. I hope I can be one of your first buyers.
Oh, yay.
We've got to get that widely available across Canada. And then I think that it starts the conversation, as John Mulaney did
Yeah.
with his bit.
Wonderful.
I think we need more people to come forward and be
Yeah.
public, because this is one of the taboo subjects no one wants
Yes.
to talk about. It's the
Yeah.
little secrets, but I
Yes.
think it's very pervasive. So I
Yeah.
really thank you for sharing your story. It's very poignant, very personal, but I think so many can benefit from your story. So I really appreciate you
Yes. Thank
sharing
you.
that.
My
And
pleasure, and it's my intention
mhm,
to allow other people to recognize that this is their story as well. I mean,
yeah,
I can't tell you how many people have said when they've read my piece that, oh, that's me.
that's
You know,
me.
it's
Yes.
wild.
And maybe no one knew, but
Mhm.
once one person, the floodgates may open.
Yeah,
People feel that, okay, wait a minute, I'm not to blame. I have no reason to
yeah.
feel shamed. It's not even your issue. It's not your immediate issue. You were
Mhm.
the victim of an addict, and you're in a very
You're in a very
very,
fragile
very
space.
fragile state, and it's ridden with, it's complicated.
And there's nothing
Addicts.
wrong, there's nothing taboo about loving an addict. I mean, we're
Mm,
talking about, other human beings and loved ones, you
yeah,
know, so without any shame or, one has to have great amounts of compassion
yeah.
for the addict that you love and for
Mhm.
yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So Diana Chaplin, how can people contact you?
Yes. So I have an email, and it's 6 degrees support at proton.com.
So
And that's
six degrees of support.
no, 6 degrees support.
Okay, 6 degrees support at protonmail.com.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. And that's the number 6.
okay. I will write it in the notes
Yeah,
as
write it in
well.
the notes. Yes.
And thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your story. And
Thank you.
thank you for writing the book. I can't wait for it to come out. My suspicion is it could do very well,
Thank you, Marianne.
because
That's
I don't think other people are addressing this important issue.
nope.
So
I
thank
have
you.
seen it. Thank you, Marianne.
Okay, I look forward to, I'm going to be watching you.
Okay. Okay.
Keep me posted.
I will
Thank
do.
you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.